Hi everybody, welcome to class. Today is Tuesday, November 12th. We are going to be taking some notes today. We're going to be discussing assignment 46. While you're waiting to get started, you could be working on your IXL number 11, or maybe not waiting to get started, but once you're done, you could be working on those. You're going to be taking notes on page 6, and we're going to get started here very quickly. We are going to grade 45 or 46, and then we're going to do notes, and then you will have an assignment on writing proportions like our notes. Now, as I explained to you yesterday in class, I'm about to start a video from previous years relating to the lesson. The first minute says things about December and a review session and different IXL skills. These are your IXL skills, okay? Not the ones on the next slide or in that video. They're due Friday. We're not having a review session on Friday because our quiz that we will be taking will be an open note quiz. Okay, so you're basically going to ignore everything on the screen that looks like this in this video, and then you're going to start watching the video from there. Okay, it's going to grade 46, so have your pen ready. I'm not sure if you're watching this as a group or you're watching it individually, but you can always pause it, and it was posted on Canvas. You can always go back and check it out. So let's look at this together.
Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Clark, and I'm going to go over the next lesson in our packet. This is writing and solving proportions. This is day 2 of our notes, and you'll notice we do have some new IXL skills for this week, and make sure you have submitted last week's IXL skills. So if you haven't, make sure you do that. It was the J1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
All of this information.
And also make sure you submitted Friday's homework on the solving proportions worksheet, as we're getting ready to submitted Friday's homework on. You have submitted last week's IXL skills. So if you have Mrs. Clark's review session, then if you need to pause it, if you missed one, to see what you did wrong, you can go ahead and do that. So we have number 1, y equals 49. Again, my work right now is showing a common multiplier, but you could have used cross products, the Jimmy Neutron method, on all problems if you wish. So just as long as you are showing what method you're using. Number 2 is d equals 36. Number 3, j equals 5. Number 4, 6 equals b, or b equals 6, either way. Number 5, 15 is equal to p, or p equals 15. Number 6, 82.5 equals h, or h equals 82 and 5/10. Number 7, q is equal to 64. Number 8, 27 equals r, or r equals 27. Number 9, 350 equals w. Number 10, n equals 286. Number 11, this was a repeating decimal answer. So b equals 42 and 6/10 repeating. So the repeating bar should just be drawn over the 6. And number 12, 57.6, or 57 and 6/10 is equal to f. On the opposite side, we have x equals 7 and 5/10. Number 14, x equals 4. Number 15, if you did the distributive property correctly, make sure you have the first step as 42 on one side, and then 2 times the quantity of x plus 1. So this is where you had to use the distributive property. So you should have ended up with 42 equals 2x plus 2. And then solved your 2-step equation to get 20 is equal to x, or x is equal to 20. Number 16, we have x equals 2. Number 17 was another distributive property. We had to take 3 times the quantity of c minus 3, and then equals 42 on the other side. So your distributive property answer should have come out to be 3c minus 9 equals 42.
You can ignore
Solving
that
your
part of the
2-step
video.
equation then gives you c equals 17. And number 18 was also a distributive property. we had 20 times the quantity of S plus 2, which equals 20S plus 40 equals 90. And then solving your two-step gives you S equals 2.5, or 2 5/10. Number 19, tell whether the statement is true or false and explain. So explain needed to mean you had to prove it in some way. So if you did cross products, you'll notice that one loop equals 5p on this side, and then the other one equals 3q. And then on this proportion, we have 5q is, that should have been written differently, but 5q equals 3. This should have been a p. And you can see that 5p would not be the same as 5q, and 3q would not be the same as 3p. So it is false, because simply cross products are not equal to each other. All right, now let's go ahead and get started on day number 2 notes. This should be on page 6 of your notes packets. And again, this is writing and solving word problems with proportions. So at the top of page 6, it just says the directions for writing and solving proportions. So first we're going to set up a proportion from the story problem. So that means we do have to write a proportion. Even if you can figure out the answer without it, this is part of the lesson, to be able to write a proportion from the story problem. So when we do that, we have to make sure we use labels on our proportions. So make sure you're using correct labels. And then solve using cross products or whichever method you choose. So you can still check for that common multiplier. Whatever method you use, just make sure you're showing which method that is. You still get to use a calculator, but you still have to show your work. And finally, don't forget to label your answer. And just check, is it reasonable? So let's go ahead and go through example 1. And it says a school has 950 students. The ratio of female students to all students is 48 to 95. Write and solve a proportion to find the number F of students that are female. So think about what two things we're comparing. So the ratio of 950 students, that would be the total students, and we're comparing the ratio of female students to all students. Okay, so let's go ahead and write female, and you can abbreviate. If you just want to put F, that's fine, but always start with the words, the two things that you are comparing, so you know how to set up the ratios in the correct order. So female students to all. Okay, so the given ratio from female to all students is 48 female, so that one goes on the top, over 95 all. So our second ratio that we set equal to the first one, we are solving for, we're finding the number F of students that are female. So this spot is what we're solving for. And they're basically telling us to use the variable F. And all students, we already know from the first sentence that the school has a total of 950 students. So that 950 goes right here. So this is the work that you should have set up to solve it. This is writing a proportion from the story problem. And now to solve it, you can either do cross products, or you can check for a common multiplier, because some of you might notice there's an easy way to get from 95 to 950 simply by multiplying by 10. So if we do that same thing to the numerators, 48 times 10 gives us 480. So this would be the number of female students or females. Okay, so that's how we would label our answer. And again, you could have still used the Jimmy Neutron method if you would have done your first loop. If you would have done 950 times 48, you would have gotten 45,600. Your second loop, 95F, and when you divided, you'd still come out with the 480. So again, if you're comfortable just using the cross product Jimmy Neutron method for every question, that's fine as well. Example 2, a cell phone company charges $5 for 250 text messages. how much does the company charge for 300 text messages? So again, the given ratio is $5 for 250 text messages. So we're comparing money, and we can just put a $sign for that, to text messages. Okay, so always start with your 2 words of what you're comparing. So we can go ahead and start with our given ratio. So $5 at the top and then the 250 at the bottom. Set up your equal sign and your second ratio to finish writing the proportion. And then how much does it charge for 300 text messages? So how do we know where to place that? Well, we look at our labels over here. Does it go on the top for money or the bottom for text? And you can see the label is text messages, so it goes on the bottom. So we're solving for that top number, and you can put whatever variable you want. So we can simply use X, or you can choose a variable of whatever you'd like. And then go ahead and choose your method. Well, this one doesn't really look like we can use a common multiplier to get from 250 to 300. So I'm going to go ahead and build that castle wall and then use the Jimmy Neutron cross products. So my first loop, and I can go ahead and calculate that with the calculator if you need to. So 5 times 300 gives us 1,500. And then your second loop, arrow up and over on the other side of the castle. And then we have 250 times x, which we write as 250x. And now to undo the 250, to isolate our variable, we divide. Do that to both sides to keep it balanced. And calculate 1,500 divided by 250, and we end up with 6. So think about your label. 6 is equal to x. 6 gets which label? Well, it was on the top of our proportion, which has to be money. So we would say $6. So think about if that makes sense. If a cell phone company charges $5 for 250 text messages, then it would be a little bit more for 300 text messages. So that does sound reasonable, $6. Example 3, there are 84 players on a football team. The ratio of offensive players to defensive players is 4-3. How many offensive players are on the team? So let's look at what they're giving us here. They're giving us offensive to defensive is 4-3. So first, let's go ahead and write down that part. So offensive to defensive is 4-3. So how many offensive players are on the team? And then how many defensive players are on the team as well? So the first thing we have to think about, this one's a little bit trickier because 84 players would be total, but they're also giving us a ratio of offensive to defensive. So we don't have anything comparing like just offensive to total. So here's what we need to do first. We need to think about if we want to get to offensive players to total players. Okay, we don't quite have that comparison given in the problem, so we need to do a little pre-work first. So we know how many offensive players there are because this number right over here tells us there are 4 offensive players. But our ratio given was offensive to defensive players, not offensive to total players. And we know how many total players are on the team. So here's what we have to do. You have to take the combination of offensive and defensive players. So if there are 4 offensive players, well, and 3 defensive, there's a total of 7 players, including offensive, defensive. So that number is where we put in the total on the bottom. So now we can set up that equal sign in our second ratio to figure out our proportion because we know there are 84 total players on the team, which goes on the bottom for total. And now we're just solving first how many offensive players are on the team. So I could put an O for offensive, but that will look like a 0. So I'm just going to use an X here. Okay, so let's go ahead. Now, again, you could find a common multiplier, or you could use cross products. So I'm going to go ahead and use cross products. So build your castle wall. Do your first loop. Arrow up and over to that first side. So 84 times 4 is 336. And then our second loop, arrow up and over on the opposite side, 7 times x is 7x. And to isolate that variable, we undo the 7 with division. Do that to both sides to keep it balanced. And we get x, and then calculate 336 divided by 7, and we get 48. And remember, that stands for offensive players. So our first answer would be 48 offensive players. And then to figure out the defensive players, think about what you would do. So if we know the total, 84 players on the team. So all we have to do now is subtract our offensive players, 48, minus from the total players, 84. So 84 minus 48 equals 36 defensive players. Okay, and if we do add these two up, then we do get 84. So that's kind of a way to check to make sure your answer is correct on that one. Okay, example 4. Your school buys 30 graphing calculators for $1,822.50. Pretty expensive, right? How much then would it cost to buy 120 calculators? Probably quite a bit. So let's find out exactly how much. So again, look at the ratio they gave us to start with. 30 graphing calculators for this amount. So I'm just going to put calculators, abbreviation, and money. Okay. Who remembers what happens whenever we're doing money or cost? We always put cost on the top. So be careful anytime you have money. Even though the problem has graphing calculators first and then money, whenever we have money in a rate, we always put cost on top. So I'm going to rewrite it then as cost over calculators. Okay, so make sure you catch that and whenever you're doing cost. Okay, so that means the 1,822.50 goes on top over the 30 calculators on the bottom. Put your equal sign in your second ratio, and then 120 calculators. Now do we put at the top or the bottom? Well, remember cost is on top, so calculators go on the bottom. So the 120 goes on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and use a C for my variable to find the cost of 100 calculators. And again, you might be able to figure out the common multiple used to get from 30 to 20. So you could go ahead and do that if you want. If not, use the Jimmy Neutron method. And the first loop would be 1,822.50 times 120, and you would get, on the side, you would get 218,700, I believe, or 0.700 maybe. And then the second loop, 30 times C is 30C. And then to isolate that variable, undo the 30 with division. And C ends up equaling 7,290. And think about what your label is. We're solving for that top number, which we said is money. So again, if you look at your problem, 30 calculators cost $1,822.50. So 120 calculators would be quite a bit more than that. So this does look reasonable, $7,290. All right. For your homework assignment, this is a double-sided homework assignment. If you're in Mrs. Kearns's class, your assignment number should be different. I believe it's 62 that you'll be submitting yours to Canvas. And if we take a look at the first problem, notice the directions say to solve each story problem using a proportion, which means we have to write a proportion. So write the proportion and show the work for solving it. Be sure to include labels, just like our notes. So let's just take a look at number one. At Fishers Junior High, the ratio of girls to boys is 3 to 4. So if there are 64 boys, how many girls are there? So the given ratio compares girls to boys. So I'm just going to put G for girls over B for boys. And the given ratio was 3 girls at the top to 4 boys at the bottom. Go ahead and put your equal sign in the second ratio. If there are 64 boys, so this is why we have our labels first. Boys are on the bottom, so we put the 64 on the bottom. Okay, and then how many girls are there? So maybe I'll use the variable G this time. And again, you could use a common multiplier, or if you would rather, you can use the Jimmy Neutron cross products method. Okay, so whichever method you're using, just show your work. So we have 3 times 64, which is 192. And then our second loop, 4 times G is 4G. And then to isolate G, we undo the 4 with division. And 192 divided by 4 equals 48. Okay, so I would label my answer as 48 girls. And then we could obviously check our answer by adding that back on to 64 boys, and I get the total. That should simplify then. My ratio should simplify to 3 to 4 if I really wanted to check that. So you're going to finish both sides, submit it into Canvas. Again, Mrs. Kearns' class will be submitting theirs into A62. Make sure you start working on your IXL skills, the new ones as well. And if you have any questions, make sure you let Mrs. Clark or Mr. Baker know. All right, thank you guys.
All right, back to our class. She referenced different numbers. Everybody's got a different number. The assignment sheet you'll be working on is assignment 47, and it is open and you can turn that in. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.